All right.
Well, welcome again, Mike, to another Mike and Darren Unplugged, and welcome to our auditors. We are again hosted by our Master of Technological Competence, Genevieve Sugrue. Thank you very much. And tonight, I thought I would ask Mike the following question. So we have you get to see it. We have already recorded one on things we think overrated.
Hmm.
And I thought we might try the opposite. Things that the overrated things are great things, they're just not as great, in our opinion, and our flavor as other people think. So these are things I think that we think are underrated. They're highly rated. They're just not given the full props that are in our judgment. And this can be a book, it can be an author, it could be a movement. If you want to do a movie, a director, a composer, it's all good. But I'm going to put you on the spot, Mike. Start us off with something you think is underrated and has not
Well,
gotten quite the
this
respect
is a
it
great
deserves.
a great topic to sit around and have a drink with. I happen to have my drinking horn handy. Mm. And so little time, you wonder where to begin. I mean, after we talked about things that are overrated last time, constantly hitting me the next day were a whole collection of things. I mean, Proust. I mean, who could forget? But I did. All right. So now looking at things that are underrated, God knows there's so many of them. Um, I want to talk about uh at first anyway, I have actually kind of a list, a laundry list. Two Canadian authors that I admire very much. The first is Robertson Davies.
Mm,
I think he's a first-rate novelist. He's written a couple of trilogies. His domain of interest and the complexity and sparse beauty of his novels um, are captivating. I am actually surprised that he was never given the Nobel. He should have gotten one for literature, in my estimation. I mean, he's
mhm.
that good. So, if you ever look at the Deptford trilogy or, any of the other novels, they represent Canadian life, but they also have the element of the universal in them.
Yeah.
And so that's one of the things that I can't help but admire. Things are represented from a Canadian perspective without ever becoming provincial. So, I mean, the guy's a real master, and I think that it's a pity he never got his Nobel. Um, the other is, I know this will sound a little surprising, but I really admire Margaret Atwood's early work when she was writing poetry. Her
Mhm.
early work was absolutely stinging, and she seemed to me in an awful lot of pain, an awful lot like
Plath.
well, yeah, I was just about to say Sylvia Plath. Um,
Yeah.
I don't think she's going to make it. I showed it to a friend one time and they said, no, she's going to take herself out. They were very dark poems, but they're also extraordinarily insightful and moving. I mean, there's something about the extremity of human emotion that lends itself to the extremity of human expression. And,
Mm.
she used to write, I mean, the stuff that I remember 40, 50 years since I encountered it, but stuff like, you fit in me, we fit together like a hook and eye, a fish hook, an open eye. Yeah, please don't do that. Please, ma'am. My brain can only handle so much of such imagery. It's a little bit like Emily Dickinson's splinter of steel in the eye that Camille Paglia talks about. Good God. Um, but I think her poetry is really underrated and not
Mm.
read as much as the novels. And I like the poetry better than the novels. I think that they show that a real big price has been paid for them. And I'm so
Mhm.
glad that she found a way out in creativity and in commitment to something because I really worried about her. She seemed like one that was moving in a dark direction. I like the ones like Carlos Santana that make it. I feel bad about the ones that don't, like Jimi Hendrix.
Yeah.
Or, for that matter, Amy Winehouse.
I was thinking about her too, actually. Yeah, yeah.
I mean, she was so talented, and her life was obviously a train wreck.
Yeah,
And,
a lot of people.
And you could see it happening, and there was nothing you could do.
Yeah.
Other things that are underrated. You want to take a crack, or shall I go off?
Sure. I'm going to take you in a different direction. I'm going to go philosophical and into my bailiwick, which is 18th century and Enlightenment.
Mm.
And I think he's highly rated, but I think seriously underrated is Bernard Mandeville.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, no, I do believe that modernity is characterized by each century producing a philosophical problem or problem person who everybody denounces and everybody disagrees with and everybody says is pure evil, and yet is the most influential thinker.
Yep.
And everyone incorporates. And for the 16th century, it's clearly Machiavelli.
Okay.
And for the 17th century, that's definitely Hobbes.
Okay.
And for the 19th century, that's Nietzsche.
Okay.
And for the 18th century, people are afraid to acknowledge who it really is, and it's Mandeville. It's not Rousseau. It's not Kant. It's not even Hume. It's Mandeville. And his invention of consequentialism as an approach to morality fundamentally changed the world. It made evolutionary theory possible. It made economics possible. His outrageous rigorism, which is on the one hand tongue-in-cheek, very clearly worldly. I mean, this is the guy that Benjamin Franklin hung out with in London in his 20s. Yet at the same time, in its literal take, it's precisely the position of Immanuel Kant in the Critique of Practical Reason. And anyone who can do that, put together young Benjamin Franklin chasing after his best friend's girlfriend, and Immanuel Kant, the ponderous, in the same work, the ponderous man of God, freedom, and immortality, is pretty impressive. And he's also very fun to read. He's funny as heck. And what's the best?
That's because you have a twist on it. Yeah.
Well, as one interlocutor told him, a woman said, "Sir, you live up to your name. You really are a man devil." But she also said, "You are, to be fair, the wickedest writer in the English language, and you're not even English. You're Dutch, and you write better English, than any other philosopher of your time." And he is witty. I'm not saying that everyone would agree with everything, but as much as Hume denounces him, Hume clearly draws on him. As much as Hutcheson denounces him, he draws on him. Smith denounces him, but he's got whole paragraphs where he says, well, he wasn't that wrong. And it's very much like what people did with Machiavelli before and with Nietzsche after, which is, well, I'm not that, but you can't escape thinking that way. So for me, and again, he's not that he's not respected among economists. He's very highly respected. I mean, without him, there's no economics. But I do think in terms of moral theory, and particularly for people who kind of like Nietzsche or something like that, how can you not enjoy, if you like the genealogy of morals, you need to read The Origins of Moral Virtue, where he says, what is it? Virtue was the progeny that flattery begot on pride. Oh, it's a real Nietzschean approach, but instead of being like, angry and Teutonic, it's very lighthearted and and Dutch.
He seems like the spirit that negates.
I don't think he was actually. What he injected into and re-injected into Enlightenment was really worldliness, which is to say, he would shock you, kind of like the libertines did, or like Moliere would shock you with a little bit over the top, but not so much because that's actually where he is, but that's what you need to come off your high horse and come down to this world. And so in some ways, he's like Hogarth. He's saying, look at the world the way it actually is. you know, so two
Somewhat
interesting.
jaundiced realism.
Excuse me.
This is somewhat jaundiced realism.
Yeah, yeah, and that's what I mean by worldliness, right? That's that strain of, you know,
Cynicism.
I don't know. It's quite cynicism. It's more like the world is, as any good Christian would say, as any good rigorist would say, a fallen place, and your biggest mistake is the notion that that in seeing it, you're better than that, right? We're all fallen.
Oh,
And
yeah.
that's the deeply humbling thing, which
Yeah.
is, hey, look, I'm Bernie Mandeville. I see the game. I'm no better.
The fact that you've dragooned Mandeville in the service of Augustine shows just how deeply inspired you are. Because I think no two people in the world, except you and I, would conjure up such an improbable image.
Except for someone who is either a well-read Mandevillian,
Yeah,
or or excuse me, a religiously minded Mandevillian, or a very well-read Augustinian, because his rigorism really is. I mean, this is what's really
but the
perverse
Fable
about
of the Bees is a rip. I granted. For
it. Yeah.
me, it's like a guilty pleasure, like the fact that I like Euripides, and I feel like I shouldn't, but I do. Same sort of thing with Aristophanes. Lots of big dick jokes. Well, okay. I mean, I know that it represents a ninth grade level of mental development and sense of humor, but the plays are funny anyway. So,
Mhm.
I have guilty pleasures. Voltaire's Candide is one of them, and Mandeville, The Fable of the Bees, is one of them. What he's doing is trying to drive a wedge permanently between politics and ethics. And I know how hard it took, how much work it took to put them together in the first place. And I'm thinking, yes, I understand why this is brilliant. And yes, I'm impressed by how it works. No, I am not confident about the long-term result of such
That's fine.
conduct.
No, that's
We
fine.
shall see.
I'm not necessarily extolling his views. I'm just saying they were really important and really insightful.
Yes, that's
And
certainly
you don't
true.
get the 18th century without them.
That's certainly true.
Yeah.
I don't so I understand exactly how that's different from not extolling his views, but
Oh, because in the same way that I think Machiavelli is profoundly insightful and deep, yet I don't agree with him.
yes, you're right. It's true.
And that's part of what's fascinating about the modern epoch is it's defined by its darkest views. Those are the most influential. I mean, you think about it, Machiavelli, not a cheerful guy. Hobbes, the philosophy of cowardice, Mandeville, pure worldliness, and 19th century Nietzsche. The will to willing for the sake of willing, because I don't believe anything else anymore.
Life is opera.
Yeah. And not only opera, but bad opera.
Yeah, right. Melodramatic opera.
Right. Over the top Wagnerian opera.
There are times when I read
Yeah.
him and I really want to be able to bang the gong, like on the Gong Show, like take this shit away, start again. That's why he has so many subheadings, the different things you can read, because someone says, oh, please stop that. But I'm a person who increasingly has that feeling among a great many authors. Oh, please stop that.
All right, so you're up now. Your turn.
Right.
Who do you want?
All right. This is one that was noted by Harold Bloom, the late Yale literary critic, and he had read everything. I mean, the guy was really impressive. A lovely, learned gentleman. He included in his Western canon Isaac Walton's Guide to Fishing. So,
wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
The Art of Fishing. Isaac Walton's, or is it The Art of Angling? But Isaac Walton, it's a pastoral. And he says what this really is, I mean, he talks about the fish, but only like they're the people who live in the village with him. And he talks about their habits, and he talks about them as if, there's something out of what do you call it? One of those Hobbit novels, it's just that we have the fishes that live here, and in some way they're connected to the. He doesn't say it, but the eternal natural perch or dace or whatever, trout. And he also tells us about the moral qualities of fish. For example, the pike is the tyrant of the fresh waters, as the salmon is the king. And then he tells you how to catch salmon, which are kingly, and pike, which are tyrannical. And, he tells you, their various moral qualities, and, they don't have to confess their sins on their own because they don't have the capacity to speak, but Isaac Walton does. And he integrates himself with nature. And he says the great thing about angling is that it's a completely simple activity, and you don't have to think about anything else, and you don't have to have any animus towards anything. There's no competition. You lift out the fish when you can, and it's a series of bucolic idyls. I mean, it's too lyrical and local to evoke Beethoven's Sixth. No big crashing and booming, no big rainstorm, but he's out there and it's a beautiful afternoon. And this is what life for Isaac Walton has been. So it's a little bit like the shepherd's idyllic poetry, the lyric poetry of ancient Greece. And I think that's what Bloom liked about it so much. And I agree with it. It's really beautiful. So that's an underrated book.
Okay.
Go ahead, take a shot.
Well, I'm going to go with, again, it's highly rated, but it doesn't get quite the props I think it deserves, and that is Labyrinth by Jorge Borges.
Yeah.
Which is a wonderful collection of his mature ficciones, and some of the stories and the essays as well bear reading and rereading and rereading. And they're so compact and dense, and yet the guy he's just scary learned. I mean, there's times you read Ulysses and you're like, how did you know this? You're you're from Dublin. Why are you writing about Abraham Abulafia? How do you know who that is? I mean, 1 out of 1,000 persons. There are Jews who 99% of the Jews don't know Abraham Abulafia. You're writing, so that amazes me. And Borges does the same thing.
Yeah,
he writes about the ancient Greece, and then the legends of the Pampas, and then all of a sudden he's that crazy story of the opening one about Tlan.
Orbis Tertius, yes.
Oh my God, where a single encyclopedic entry has changed the world, and now we've all adopted Barclayan metaphysics. And the world's gone. And then the biting line at the end, when everyone's gone like into crazy metaphysics. Well, of course, in a century where you embrace Nazism and communism and socialism, anything's possible. Any crazy idea that gets you away from like reality, of course people are going to go for it. And it's when he finally gets to that level, it shocks you, because these are the things we grew up with and that are part of our furniture. And he says, you're in Tlan. Your actual, turn on the TV, that's Tlan. It has nothing to do with the boom, your head goes. And I just get that with so many of his stories.
That's a very apt interpretation, it seems to me, and you're right. Borges is a truly universal writer, a man of great brilliance, and as in the case with some musicians, it seems that being blind or going blind has somehow sharpened the sound of language for him, in the same way that musical sounds are sometimes found intensified in those that aren't able to see. I mean, I think of somebody like Stevie Wonder.
Yeah.
I mean, so I think that this can be a kind of a somehow his body and mind overcompensating for that in a particular direction. And damn, the results are outstandingly beautiful. I like Dream Tigers. There are a number of sets of Borges that I love, but The Economy, the best, or one of my favorite of his short stories is indeed short. It's it's approximately a paragraph, and it's called The Maker. And what it turns out to be is the self-described autobiography of growing up and eventually losing his sight as an adult, and then being able to create epic poetry. It's the autobiography of Homer. Maker. That's because poesis means maker.
Mm-hmm.
To make someone who constructs it out of nothing. That's where it gets. So yeah, it's a shocking piece. Do you what do you think of Chekhov's short stories? I think they're underrated. I mean, they just knock me down.
Yeah, though it's hard to think of Chekhov as underrated, but maybe you're right. He's just not that read as much. But he's, for
I think he's given more credit as a dramatist.
Plays, for the dramatist, right? Cherry Orchard and stuff like that. That's true.
But his short stories are both nimble and clever, and they have that unsoundable depth that you get with some Russian authors.
You know who I was just thinking of for the short story? Gogol.
Yeah, Dead Souls.
Like The Nose or The Cape. These like crazy, insane. I mean, the novel is good. Dead Souls, very good. But the crazy novel he wrote about the Ukrainian Cossack, whose name I forget. That's it. Oh yeah, that's it. And it's roiling, and it really captures the flavor of a crazy moment in time. But I actually prefer his short stories too. And they're. I mean, I think he's actually the in those short stories inventing magical realism. I think he long precedes Bulgakov, much less Borges and
but for him it's a miraculous realism. As you know, in his short story, the student said, when he was coming home from seminary, and stopped among women, and they were weeping, just like they had 2,000 years ago. And all of a sudden, I mean, it transformed him. I mean, that's such an unbelievably powerful story. Now, I wouldn't call that magical so much as I would call that in the tradition of Russian Orthodox literary apologetics. Because he says, no, what he's saying is, look, this guy's had a religious transformation, and he did it as a result on Good Friday, going home, as a result of watching women weep the way they used to. And he asked him why they're weeping, and he says, because it's Good Friday, and Peter's denying Jesus. And in other words, time is abolished. And he said, it seemed to me that when I pulled on one end of history, I saw the other end shake.
Well, since we're dealing with Russian mystagogy, yeah, I'm going to throw another one in there. And it's a great book, and it's well respected, but I think it's underrated. And I think actually Harold Bloom discussed it in one of his last books and rated it highly, but not highly enough, because he doesn't like Russian mystagogy. He's got a little bit of a thing. Understandable. And that is Bulgakov's Master and Margarita.
Yeah.
Which I actually think is one of the truly great books of the 20th century.
I agree. The Russians always have something dark to introduce, and that we get an outright devil in a century that seems, how can I put it, in which the diabolical seems so prosaic. We get an interesting, entertaining one here. And that's so hard to do. You would think that all the devil had been done once we have Dostoevsky and, Goethe and, a few other of the canonical devils. But no, he mines that idea and does very well with it. And that's actually very, very impressive.
Yeah. And the reconsideration of Pontius Pilate.
Yeah.
The tale of the master.
I always like the people who, with good conscience or bad, try and enlist Pontius Pilate and Jesus on their side. Now, if you will get a chance to look at, here's something that's overrated, but I just can't leave it off. In his short essay, a couple of parts, called Utilitarianism, John Stuart Mill assures us that Jesus was a utilitarian.
Of course he was. Of course he was. Yeah.
No,
He
I
wanted the
thought
greatest happiness for the greatest measure, the
yeah,
greatest
well,
number.
I thought that it said in scripture that Pilate said, well, look, it's better that I kill one than a whole bunch of guys die in a riot. I thought that he was the utilitarian, but the need to enlist admirable people, could be Jesus, could be Shakespeare, on anybody's particular side, makes them actually kind of gullible when it comes to evidence. Everybody wants, look, there's the Catholic Shakespeare, the Protestant Shakespeare, the vegetarian Shakespeare, the royalist, the military, fill it all in. And that's even more true about Jesus. He's a hapax.
Okay, your turn.
My turn. Okay.
Yeah.
Turning to one of my favorite novels of the 20th century, The Magic Mountain by Thomas Mann.
Okay.
What I like best about that is the response by the Marxist critic, the great, genuine Marxist intellectual, Georg Lukács.
Right.
I really like Georg and Thomas because even though they disagree with each other and could not create any agreement about politics, I would say that it's very funny that Lukács was so positive, saying that The Magic Mountain was the greatest of the bourgeois novels, right? And even greater than Joyce, which wouldn't be directly accessible to him, whereas Mann is. That's a big part of the connection between them. But in Mann's novel, one of the characters is Georg Lukács, right? He's not called Georg Lukács, but it's a caricature of Lukács. And what's really funny about this is that Mann thought that this would be the end of his friendship with Lukács in the same way that Dr. Faustus, the novel, was the end of his friendship with Schoenberg, because how can I put it? The nihilistic protagonist of the novel is a Jewish Jesuit named Naphtha. Right. And he wears these elegant cloaks. He's really wealthy, and he's up on the Magic Mountain, healing from God only knows what disease. But he insists on advocating all kinds of counter-enlightenment stuff.
Right.
Right.
The anti-Settembrini.
Yeah, that's right. Settembrini is our alternative.
Right.
And the greatest single scene is at the end of in the book, but also arguably in 20th century literature, is the duel between Naphtha and Settembrini. Now, Lukács thought this was an amazing thing, and it is, except that Mann was actually creating a literary caricature of him, and he couldn't see it. And here's a very careful reader with a very large theoretical apparatus to bring to literature, who sees everything but what everybody else sees. And there's something terribly ironic about that. Remember what I say more than one time in the course of the lectures, every insight is partial blindness. In this case, Lukács' partial blindness is ripplingly funny because it's about him and what a crazy Jewish Jesuit a kamikaze he is. And
Well, I think, I suspect he read the not to destroy this for people who haven't read it. He read not this taking or action as an act of defiance, whereas I think Mon intended it as an act of cowardice. Well, Settembrini takes a first act. I mean, we'll not ruin it for the audience, and that's his act of principle.
right.
And that should take a different act than he takes, but he doesn't have the stones to do it. So he does something even more horrific that destroys Settembrini. But I think, for Lukács, he thinks that act was well thought out and careful. He trumped him. Whereas I think for Mon, especially when you see the end of the novel when he dies in the ditch, no, that's just cowardice. That's what the whole century screwed up.
I think that's a very good point. I think both of us could recommend with the full 5 stars Mon's Magic Mountain.
Yeah.
I wouldn't call it underrated. It's genuinely great by any estimation, but it's one of the truly great experiences in 20th century literature.
Yeah, I think it's highly rated, but I think it's probably fallen out of fashion a lot.
Yeah, that's
it's
probably
very
true.
long, it's very slow, and it really does capture, a sort of what for us must seem, I think, especially for people in the 21st century, a very dull fin de siècle European culture, right? Where, I mean, they're up there forever. Nothing happens. I mean, zero. It's a time out of time, and we don't live that way anymore.
Yeah.
I mean, that's actually that's not far from Davos where it happens.
That's right. That's right.
It's crazy,
That's actually well done. So, you got another one, or you want me to do one?
Sure. Let's see. Thinking about this.
Like the Stooges say, every time you think you weaken the nation. Like the Three Stooges say, every time you think you weaken the nation.
No doubt. Okay. I'm going to switch gears entirely and go to the visual arts. Someone who I think is great but underrated, and that's Frans Hals. I think he's sort of seen as like a B-lister, like a Nicholas Maes in the Netherlands equivalent, or a Veronese in Italy. I don't think so. I think he's more like the early Mannerists that are paving the way for Caravaggio. I think his use of brushstrokes and his boldness is very much, he is the link that makes the later Rembrandt possible. He and Judith Leister.
It makes perfect sense to me that you like that Netherlandish realism. I bet you really go for Dürer too. It's just the kind of light that you have. I can see why. Look, it's beautiful.
I do like Dürer, actually.
Of course I like Dürer. But I mean, I can see why you would like that Netherlandish realism. I can sort of see the attraction of mannerism too. Except that Caravaggio, there's just much of a muchness. In other words, there's too much.
He's gone full Baroque. He's gone full Baroque, right?
Right.
But you know what? I have a taste. You can develop a taste for that too. I like El Greco.
Well, I do too.
That's really over the top.
Yeah, but I've already been diagnosed. You should be.
Okay, but no, I mean it's part of it is the arrogance of the guy. This is a guy who comes up from Greece. El Greco is he's painting briefly in Venice, and they ask him, "So what do you think about who is it? I think it's Titian." He said, "Well, he'd have been really great if you knew how to paint."
I don't like that.
Yeah, right. I mean, if only he knew how to paint, boy, he could have been really
good. Yeah, talent, but it was wasted.
I think he had a similar take on Raphael, like, boy, really good technique. I mean, if only he could have composed.
Yeah. It's like my take on Andy Warhol. You know, I mean, he would have been better if he had talent, but like you said, art is what you can get away with. I
Right.
Andy kind of trying, but that's just yeah, that's a great
That's
choice.
for underrated, not
Oh,
overrated.
Greco. Yeah, I like that. And Velasquez too. Those
Oh,
are
I don't think he's underrated. I mean, I think
Yeah.
he's recognized as universal genius.
Yeah.
I mean, I think that's part of why, I think part of the reason Howells is overlooked and El Greco is overlooked is because of Velasquez and Rembrandt and Vermeer. I mean, they're just so huge that it's like, I happen to be a big fan of Fra Lippi and I love Botticelli, but you got Michelangelo, Da Vinci, and Raphael. It's hard to see past that, and
Yeah.
it's unfortunate because they're pretty great.
Yeah. Yeah. It's like those old Yankees teams where they had three, sometimes four guys that were 300 hitters in a row. And, they called them murderers row. And there are some times when the artistic world just explodes. And the Italian Renaissance is one of those, both in the South initially, but also in the North as well. And I can see why you would like the Netherlandish school, just because the Netherlands and its culture has always been something that appeals to you. And I don't blame you for it. They're really great.